Since we have meditated on this gospel last Sunday and the following days, I would like to meditate with you the first reading from from Prophet Jeremiah. I learned to drive the car in the mission in Argentina. And one of the first things that they taught me was to change gear, no? Yung naka-neutral o punto muerto na sabi nila, etc. What we call now in Tagalog, the cambio, magcambio. And for me, it was one of the most difficult part of learning how to drive, and because you have to combine how many action, and you use how many, the feet with the clutch, tapos yung cambio, yung accelerator, etc. And lalo na itong mga sasakyan na manual pa noon. Now, thank God that we have the automatic. Isa lang na kuwan ay diretso na. You do not need to change or shift gears. No. It was explained to me that if one doesn't change gears, you will easily ruin the car. It depends upon the speed. One has to shift to the appropriate gear. Otherwise, it would strain unnecessarily the engine, and it would not achieve its full potential na magkinta ka hanggang segunda ka lang, and ultimately, it will ruin the car. I remember one conferer, one fellow priest there in the mission, when he would arrive during meetings, we know that it would be he, because maingay yung pagdating niya kasi hanggang tersera lang siya. No. Nandyan na si Padre dahil alam mo na maingay kasi he is forcing the engine without, I do not know, sabi nga nila, joke nila, hindi nagkwakwarta o kinta yung kanyang gears. No? So one has to learn to change or shift gears. One of the experiences of God's people that necessitated a change or a shift of gear, a change of vision, or what it is popularly called now the paradigm shift, was the experience of the exile. The exile, which was the experience of the people of God during the time of Jeremiah, this exile disturbed or upset the religious conception of the people of God that identifies too much or too closely this concept of the people of God with the descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel. The prophets like Jeremiah, without denying the promise of God to these Hebrew people, felt the necessity of launching a new perspective, a new vision. What is this? That Jerusalem will always be the center of the people of God, but this will be constituted by the so-called remnant of Israel and by the new people God would call. It will not only be the descendants anymore of David who will be considered, counted as people of God, but there is a new category, and that is they will be considered so by the purity of their heart. God remains faithful to His land and to the idea of a people that maintains the faith in His presence and action. But these racial categories, while not being denied, becomes now insufficient. Hindi na lamang ang batayan ng pagiging bayan ng Diyos, ang pagiging galing kay David, lahi ni David. Precisely because it starts now this a religion of the heart. And Jeremiah opens this membership to God's people to new peoples who are capable also of being faithful to God, to have that purity of heart. This does not say that the mission of Israel has stopped, but the action of God goes beyond Israel. That is the meaning. That is the vision that Jeremiah wanted to inculcate to these people. As Christians, this helps us understand also our relationship with the concept of the people of God. We do not consider ourselves as descendants or heirs of the Hebrew people because racially we are not. That continues its way in time. But we as Christians, heirs of these new people of God, promised by the prophets, people whose hearts are attuned to God and faithful to God. In this new people of God, the Ark of the Covenant, which was the center of attention, or they identified, for example, the presence of God with that Ark of the Covenant placed in the Holy of Holies in the temple. Jeremiah prophesied in verse 16 that it will not be remembered anymore. Thus, the certainty, at times very presumptuous, of possessing God by those who had this Ark of the Covenant is now considered as it will not be remembered anymore, Jeremiah said. Meaning, the presence of God is not identified anymore or exclusively to that Ark of the Covenant. The prophet Jeremiah proposed here a change of gears, a new vision of life in order to understand God's ways and that we may follow Him more faithfully. The new and more universal basis of belonging to God is not the racial, the social, or political affiliation, but rather to that faithfulness of the heart. Our experience of this pandemic is inviting us also to change gears, to have this paradigm shift, as they would say, in many aspects of our life. Maybe from this point on, we need to rethink our vision of life as a people, as a community, and even as a church. Maybe this will be our task of the task of the humanity for the next decade. But one thing is sure, God's faithfulness to His covenant with His people remains. The covenant which He sealed with the blood of His Son. And this is something certain that we can hold on to. This covenant is what we celebrate in the Eucharist. The Eucharist becomes and is the assurance of God's faithfulness and care to His people. Therefore, in these changing times, in the need for changing gears, perspectives, this is something that will always remain the faithfulness of God and His love for us. Let's hold on to this truth of God's faithfulness and love for humanity. Amen.